How are you doing, André? Hello, Jacques. Are you well? Yes, fine. Well, we're retired now, so we have time for jokes, eh? Oh, yes. Well, hey, it's time to go, and we're lucky because the weather is fine today. Right, so you saw the present-day Cessenon Bridge, but there have been several bridges through history. My parents lived to see 3 of them. The first one was a suspension bridge built in 1886. It was a toll bridge. I used to know people who paid that toll to cross. Eventually the toll tax was bought by the local authorities, and from then on it was free. Well, it was a tricky bridge. Its deck was made of timber. There were several accidents, one with a coach and another one with a truck. And eventually they announced it would be demolished and replaced by a pillared bridge. That pillared bridge was built around 1930, but it was doomed. Just after its inauguration, it was carried away by the famous 1930 flood, and it was replaced by the suspension bridge we now know. It was operational in 1931, and during the work, there was a ferry. You can still see the pier over there. In Cessenon, we have the River Orbe. When we were kids, we could hardly walk, but our parents would take us for a swim in the river, and it was done in different stages, you see. In the beginning, we'd just paddle along a few meters from the bank. Then, as we were growing up, we'd start swimming across the river, and on the other side, there was a vestige from an old rampart. And we'd use it as a diving board, and it had different levels, you see. First, the quarter at 1 or 1.5 meter. Then the half level was at about 2.5 meters. Then the 3/4 level, which must have been a height of 3 or 3.5 meters. And finally, there was the end of the rampart, which was the very top. So when you'd say, "I'm diving from the end of the rampart," that meant you were nearly a teenager. The Orbe was actually an open sewer, you see. People would throw loads of things in it. Pots, cats when you wanted to drown one, dogs too. Every so often the shepherd would throw out a dead sheep, and once there was this man, we used to call him the Malgache. He had a big donkey, had just died, and then it was a day when the Orbe was in flood, an aigat as we call it here. And so they came, a group of them, and they threw the donkey over the bridge, and then they stood by the end of the bridge like it was a funeral, and they said their prayers and their thanks. Obviously, the Orbe was very useful in many respects, especially for the women to do their laundry, the famous Visite. Generally, they'd do it on the riverbank. They'd wash, soak, and rinse, and very often they would spread the laundry on the gravel. You didn't need no iron after that. It looked fine. That's the way my mother did it, and so did everyone. Then later on there were the wash houses in the village, and then the washing machines, but that's more recent. And then there was the 1953 flood, the flood of the century. But you see, in general, there's a minor flood every 10 to 15 years. And what happened when there was a flood, because there were many wine growers in the village? Well, people would not go to work because of the rain, and so they'd all go to the bridge every hour to check on the water level ruler. And they would see if the water was going up or down, or if it was staying put. And there was some who came to fish, because you see on the left-hand side of the bridge there's a little space we call a reculade, where the wall is shaped into a corner. And because the Orbe was in spate, the fish would take shelter in that corner, and the elders would bring baganaus. Baganaus, it's a kind of fishing net. They would plunge it into the water in that corner, and when they pulled it up, it often had fish, and there were always men on the lookout because, you see, the gendarmes were watching because this was sort of poaching, so some would be looking out to see if the gendarmes were coming so they could warn the fishermen. There were 2 ways to fish during a flood. The one you just described was a circle held up by a rope and you'd pull it up. But the baganao was a sort of netted cone stuck onto a long stick, and you'd use it from the bank against the current. It was forbidden, but nearly everyone in Cessenon who was old enough did it. Well, I think we're finished for now. Yeah, it's good timing. It's time for the aperitif, isn't it? Well then, bye now. See you again. All right, see you later.